Welcome to Talking Beat, the podcast for the Portland Police Bureau. We're focusing on thoughtful conversations that we hope will inform and provide you with a small glimpse of work performed by Portland police officers, as well as issues affecting public safety in our city. Here's what's on today's show.
And what I'd like folks to think about when they're out on the road and driving is that a lot of people who are out here driving right now are doing so because they have an essential job function. They need to get to and from work, and we need to keep that in mind. We need every essential worker that we have right now. We do not need anybody involved in a collision because they're driving that speed. I would encourage you to just set your cruise control. We are all getting places faster than we have prior to this because there are less cars on the road. So enjoy the fact that you will get there a few minutes early and drive the speed limit.
On this special edition of the Talking Beat, Lieutenant Tina Jones talks to representatives from the Portland Police Bureau's Bike Theft Task Force, as well as burglary and robbery detectives. She also interviews the Portland Police Bureau's Homeless Outreach Liaison, a sergeant from the Gun Violence Reduction Unit, and Chief Jami Resch. Hear how this unusual time has affected their jobs and what it means in regard to public safety in their respective units. Thanks for listening.
Start out today with one of our officers who works for our bike task force, Dave Sanders. Welcome.
First, it's good to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited that you're here with us today, and we want to talk a little bit to start out with about your tenure at PPB and what your assigned role is.
Yeah, so I've been with the Bureau about 13 years, and about 8 of those years have been on the bike unit. So I'm one of 6 that work full-time on bikes, mostly downtown in the core area. And most of my duties kind of involve livability issues, so relating to thefts, drugs, trespassing, vandalism, that sort of thing. But another hat that I get to wear is helping to manage bike theft in the city. And the position isn't staffed full-time to deal with bike theft, but we're able to do it as time allows, kind of amongst our normal duties. So I'm a part of the Bike Theft Task Force, which my partner Dave Bryant and I started in 2015, and we're continuing those efforts. So that's mainly what I do.
Awesome. So can you share a little bit with us about what has changed for you and your unit during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, so our unit's working from a patrol car, which is very different from what we're used to. We're used to a lot of that continuous public interaction out riding around town. So we miss that. We're one of the few city employees that get paid to ride a bike, which is awesome. So we're excited to get back to that. But what has changed is we're not able to do events that we were excited to do in April and May. Our bike outreach program is kind of on pause right now, so that means not doing a lot of bike registration stations, lock exchange events, and so forth. So it's coming. Keep looking for it, but that's on pause right now.
So for now, you guys are postponing those events until things get back to maybe a new normal down the road.
Yep.
Awesome. So how are you and the team managing your work differently then?
Well, no telecommuting yet for us. So kind of business as usual. We're still out there kind of managing things downtown. But we are doing a lot more meetings on the airways, a lot more phone calls and that sort of thing, just like everybody else.
So working in a patrol car, not riding the bikes as much, but still coming in and taking care of the similar issues that you guys have been before.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. So is there anything related to your focus of work that you think the public should be aware of given the current situation?
Yeah, so I want everybody to know that bike theft is still an issue. It's a massive issue that we're trying to control. And specifically this year and into March and April, we're getting hammered with bike theft, and we're seeing an increase right now. And bike theft has always kind of followed the seasonal and weather patterns. More bikes outside, more people riding typically results in more thefts. But I think these thieves are also taking advantage of the pandemic and targeting the bikes where they're currently at. Not as many bikes are in public, so they're looking indoors and getting creative on how to seek out these bikes and steal them. So we're seeing a lot of thefts from bike storage areas, basements. These normally, quote, secure areas are being targeted by these thieves, and a lot of bikes are being stolen.
That's unfortunate. I know a lot of people rely on bikes for transportation, and Portland is known as a bike community for sure. But there are some tips that you have for folks around bike theft. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, so the two big ones we really need the community's help with, they're kind of the two pillars of our End Bike Theft campaign, and that's locking and registration. And with locking, we want you to lock your bike as well indoors as you do outdoors. And that means using a quality U-lock. Generally, you have to spend about $50 or more on a lock, and make sure you lock the frame to a good bike rack. So those are the two keys to locking. And then bike registration has been really a priority for us lately, and will continue to be over the next few years. We want everybody to register their bike, no matter how much they use it or where it's parked. And that's super easy. It's just helping you record what you have. And our partner, National Bike Registry, Project 529, has been doing a phenomenal job of helping us manage that. So it's as simple as just going to project529.com/Portland, going out to your garage and taking the 5 minutes to record your serial number and record what you have.
So if people have a little bit of time, 5 minutes or so, to record and register their bike, what's the benefit of that?
Well, it kind of documents that bike as yours. So if that bike is stolen, a lot of times the owners don't even know it's gone. And our officers are able to find it out in the community and know who it belongs to and recover that bike even before the owner knows it's stolen. But if you do find it stolen, you can indicate that in your 529 account, and the community can be helping look out for that bike. So it really doubles your chances at getting the bike back. If it's registered, which is about 1 in 5 actually come back to the owner, which could be better, but I think a lot of people would buy a lottery ticket with those odds. So we hope a lot of people will see the value of that. And on a good note, we're seeing a lot more recoveries now, double-digit increases this year in bike recoveries. So our officers are out there searching for these bikes out in the community that have been stolen, and a lot of them are getting back to the owners.
Awesome. Well, I know you guys are doing a lot of good work. I know that you also have a Twitter for your unit, and there's a lot of interaction with the community about different bikes that you come across or see. I know you're not afraid to poke fun at yourself sometimes too. Can you share a little bit about the bike story that you posted? I know.
Yeah,
I think it's a good learning lesson.
I professionally have had now 2 bikes stolen from me. One was my personal bike, stolen in front of the courthouse. I had it handcuffed to a bike rack. The thief picked the handcuffs and was able to get away with the bike, which the frame did come back to us eventually a couple months later because it was registered. Which shows the success, just the frame, though, unfortunately. But the second bike I had stolen, I recovered a stolen bike, and I had it on the front of my patrol car at the time. This about a month ago, and I had my back turned to the car, and somebody stole it off the front. So double stolen.
Yeah, well, I think that it'll help you to continue to get that message out there. Don't use handcuffs to lock up your bike. There's better methods. But we really appreciate you taking the time today to come out. And we just want to encourage people to definitely register their bikes and put them inside and keep them in a safe space. So
absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So our next guest is Detective Darren Posey from our burglary task force. So awesome. Thanks for coming out. And can you start out just by sharing a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I've been with the Police Bureau for about 23 years. And we, in the burglary task force, which is where I work, we work on serial burglars and also groups that are committing burglaries both commercially and residentially. We also do a lot of work with the precincts and the officers with investigative assistance in the cases that they're working on. And then also we look at trends and suspect profiles, working to basically follow those items. And we also work at trying to locate stolen property for people.
So burglary is something that is that does happen in Portland, and you guys are looking at trends and trying to apprehend, people who are prolific burglars, it sounds like. So given all that, what has changed for your team and you as an investigator since we've been experiencing this pandemic?
So a couple of things, obviously, just with our office space, had to kind of make sure everything's set up so that we're 6 feet apart from everybody. And then also just with interviewing people and talking to people, that's really changed things dramatically for us. So we're looking at how we manage that as far as distancing and that type of a thing. Also, along with that, we've experienced an increase in our call-outs. So we've actually had more custody assist cases that have come up, and we're also seeing a trend now where we're seeing a lot more commercial burglaries as related to, the crimes that are coming through as opposed to residential burglaries.
So just to clarify for our media partners and those listening, so when you get called out, you don't get called out to every burglary, but you mentioned custody assist. Can you kind of describe what that is?
Yeah, so when somebody is arrested in relation to a burglary incident, like let's say they were captured running away from the scene of the crime, we are called in to help out with that. We conduct the custody interview with the suspect, and then we also oversee the rest of the investigation afterwards as well.
And so you indicated your team has been getting called out more frequently,
yes,
which indicates there have been more captures, I guess.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, well, that's good news. Mm-hmm. So how are you and your team managing your work differently, given all this?
So obviously, like I talked about before, our suspect interviews and witness interviews as well, we're just looking at ways on how we can make that safe for all parties involved during this time. So we spend a lot of time kind of just figuring out what works best and depending on where we're at, because we do our interviews sometimes in different places and whatnot. So with that, the other big change or thing that we're looking at this point in time is with this pandemic situation, the governor has issued a state of emergency. And with that, that affects the crime of theft. And so in the ORS, it basically bumps it from, if it's a misdemeanor, to a felony level theft, theft 1 essentially. And so the idea here is it creates a more serious consequence for those who commit theft during the declared emergency, and then hopefully provides a deterrent for people to engage in that behavior. So we're looking at that. We haven't actually done that with any of our cases at this point. We're talking with the city attorney's office as well as the DA's office about those issues.
So your team's working with the district attorney's office and the city attorneys to assess whether or not some of these cases may in fact actually fall into a higher category. Correct. Because it's happening during this emergency.
That is correct.
Okay. So depending on where that goes, there might be more to come on that, but it is, something of note.
Yes.
For sure. So is there anything related to your work in the burglary task force that you think the public should be aware of, some trends or anything that you guys are seeing?
Well, we're seeing definitely a trend to commercial burglaries. And obviously, with a lot of people not at the businesses during what would be their regular hours as well as after hours, what we're finding is people are at home, so our residential burglaries aren't as dramatic of a situation at this point in time. So what we'd like to get across or have people do, especially who our community members that own businesses, we really think that this would be a great time to take an assessment of your property and see how you can better secure it. If you don't normally do inventories of your equipment or retail property, this would be a good time to maybe do that and see how you can better secure it. We think that if you're going to be closed for a lengthy period of time, and or you have reduced hours in your business, to remove valuables from the storefront as much as possible. We found that small electronics, cash registers, phones, bank bags, and other valuable items of inventory that are in view from the outside provide a motive for people who are interested in illegal intentions. And so removing those things might be a good thing to do at this point in time.
So do an internal kind of assessment, inventory, and then maybe step outside and see what you can see from outside the windows and be thinking about, is there anything that could be of value? Those sorts of things are proactive things.
Exactly. Kind of like a jewelry store. Like a jewelry store, when they close up shop in the evening, they put the steel doors down, and then they remove all of that product from the window cases and the display cases. And so the same kind of idea is just removing that opportunity.
So I'm going to circle back to something you said about residential burglaries. I think that there's a common perception that burglaries happen at night because that's what we see, in movies and such. But, before this, we would see a lot of residential burglaries, but those are primarily during the day, correct?
Yeah, primarily. There'll be early morning hours, like right after people leave for work. But also in the afternoon, but mostly in the daytime. Most of our commercial burglaries take place at night, for the most part, which actually we've been talking with some of our night shift officers in the precincts, and they have, and we work with them in these cases. We have been, they have been employing some different tactics, which have been working very well in capturing some people.
Awesome. Well, we're not going to give those tactics away, but it's good to know that, our folks are adapting as well, and we are catching some of these folks. We also encourage people, if they do see suspicious activity, to note that and to call.
Yeah, I just want to thank our community members so much for watching out for each other. That's really important, especially right now. And, and even watching out for your neighborhood business. There's a lot of people that live close by to the businesses that are closed, and you can be very helpful in just keeping an eye out for what's going on. Often, community members are the success, the element of a success in our investigations, and we appreciate it.
Because can you provide an example of how community helps you to solve these cases?
Yeah, we just had a case where a particular business was broken into, and before they actually broke into the location, somebody noticed that these people were carrying an axe up to the business, and they thought that was really strange, and so they actually started filming it. And that was key. It was a very key piece to help us because the business didn't have video surveillance on the outside, and so we were able to identify those people and capture them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time today. We appreciate everything that you and your team are doing, especially for burglary. So we'll make sure we get some of those tips out there. Thank you, Detective Posey.
Thank you.
So we're going to then move on and talk to another detective from our robbery division, Detective Brett Hawkinson. Hi, Brett.
Hey, how's it going?
Thank you for joining us. Good.
Thanks for having me.
So can we start out just talking a little bit about the the robbery detail? I got stuck there.
It's funny that you do that because there's actually a common misconception. Robbery and burglary actually get confused all the time by the public. So maybe this is a great opportunity to talk about that.
So tell us what the difference is.
So burglary, like what Detective Posey was just talking about, it's basically it's theft, but it's involved in buildings, inside of buildings. Robbery, it's theft, but it also involves use of force or violence or intimidation. And so as a detail, our mission, our goal is to identify the subjects who are using force, threats, and violence to take your stuff.
Very good distinction, and you're right. It does get easily confused. So how has the pandemic changed what you are seeing in your unit or what you are doing?
Well, ironically, as I sit here with my mask, one of the things that came to mind is we're doing more in-person contact wearing masks, which is unusual in my job. I haven't had to do that before, but we're also, employing social distancing. And another big thing that we use, or I've been using more, is the telephone. I'm a big fan of contacting victims in person, but just given the circumstances, it seems it's more appropriate to make a lot of telephonic contact with our victims and our witnesses and making contact with them. However, rest be assured, we're still out there. We're still writing search warrants, looking for evidence, looking for guns that are wielded by our suspects. We're still doing in-person interviews of our robbery suspects that we're capturing. And we're still out there, actively canvassing crime scenes, looking for video surveillance and other clues that are going to help us identify the patterns and solve the crimes.
So how has robbery kind of changed, or the patterns? You mentioned that.
Well,
given the pandemic, what are you guys seeing?
Well, our victim typology has logically, you'd think it's going to shift, right? Because a lot of our victims, or the victimology of robbery, are businesses. Well, obviously, there's a lot of commercial establishments that are now closed, and without the workers and the people actively working and being there, they're not there to become victims. And so our robbers, they're shifting, and they're going after the essential businesses, like marijuana shops. I think are classified as essential businesses, and they're open. We've seen some porn store robberies, but then also we've seen some grocery stores, mini marts, and banks. Banks are open and they continue to be robbed.
So whereas before it may have been taverns or other places that are closed down now. Now there's been a little bit of a shift, which like you said, makes common sense. But I think that it's a worthwhile point because some of the folks who work at those businesses may not be thinking that they could be a potential target. So it's worth them having that in mind.
Absolutely.
So do you have any tips to share about that?
About robberies?
Yeah, for, any of those businesses.
I'm a huge fan of employing more than one employee at a time, right? So if you're a business owner, spend the extra money to have 2 or more employees working at the same time, which it seems weird with social distancing, but, employer social distance practices. But armed robbers in general, they tend to take advantage of opportunities. And if you're working by yourselves, you're setting yourself more up to be, in a one-on-one situation with someone who's going to take advantage of you. So employing a second person, keeping your front windows clear so our officers out patrolling and the public can look into your business and they can see what's going on. And I think those are all important things to do. And then having a great video system, right? That's helpful. Knowing how your alarm system works, that's another great way to do that. And let's see. A bunch of things that we could cover. This is general crime prevention tips we give to any business owners in the world of robbery and robbery prevention. That's what comes to the top of my head.
Awesome. So is there anything else related to what's going on with the robbery division that the public should be aware of, or did we cover it?
I think we covered it.
We covered it? All right.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you, I skipped it with other folks, but I think that you are always good for sharing. But do you have any tips or ideas for the public on how to manage stress during this time of crisis?
Well, I find myself stress eating. That's kind of my big... No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I think going for walks, spending time with your family, and those that if you're living with other folks, you get to spend more time developing your relationships. I know in my job, it's been very busy. It's a very busy, weird hours. It's been refreshing to spend more time with the little guys and my wife and sit down, play family games, and go on walks together. It's good. It's a good time to take advantage of that.
We appreciate you being here and sharing some of this information today, Brett.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We're going to have an opportunity to talk with Stephanie Harrow. Stephanie is our homeless outreach liaison for the Bureau.
Hi.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about your assigned role with PPB?
Sure. So I started in this position of August of 2019. I'm the first ever homeless liaison for PPB, which is pretty exciting. My job mainly is to make sure we have ongoing relationships and open communication with our community partners for issues related to homelessness. I also act as a resource for, for those community partners and for our officers for resources that are related to homelessness as well. And I do spend time talking about our internal policy and training needs for PPB members.
Awesome. So what has changed for you in your role during this pandemic?
I have been telecommuting since mid-March, so just about a month now since the mayor's state of emergency declaration. So interestingly, my work hasn't changed significantly. A lot of my work is meeting with people, which is preferably done face-to-face. With these changes, though, I would say probably 99% of those meetings are continuing through a variety of technology. And there are definitely more meetings that have been added so we can help keep people safe and figure out the best ways to help people understand social distancing and the governor's stay-at-home order for the folks who are experiencing homelessness.
Well, and I think that it's fortunate that you started before this so you could meet all the partners face-to-face before you had to shift to this.
Yeah, it's been really useful because at this point I do know a good portion, if not all of the folks that I'm continuing to work with from a distance. So those relationships are already there, which makes the collaboration piece that much easier.
Just since it might not be clear, what kind of which partners are you referencing?
Sure. So
I have regular contact with.
I work with a variety of homeless services agencies. So people who are running shelters, who are doing food delivery in the community, who continue to do food delivery in the community for people experiencing homelessness, other government agencies, other nonprofits, and mainly, I would say anyone and everyone who has anything to do with homelessness in the city of Portland.
So is there anything related to your work that you think that the public should be aware of? Yeah,
so this has been a really busy time because there is so much concern about how do we help people experiencing homelessness understand the social distancing piece. How do we help people maintain social distancing in environments where that's really difficult? Obviously, stay-at-home orders are very difficult for people who don't have homes. And so in the beginning of this, when the governor's stay-at-home order first came out, I worked quite a bit with our communications team to come out with messaging around PPB's role. There was a lot of fear that I was hearing about from our community outreach workers. There's a lot of fear in the homeless community about whether or not they're going to get arrested if they weren't quote unquote at home or if they were seen in public, if they weren't adhering to social distancing. So we worked internally to come up with some messaging to help people understand that PPB's role is an educational role and that arrest is a very last resort. And that continues to be true. We are not out there, as people were fearing, essentially rounding people up and taking them against their will to some location. So we continue to educate people on social distancing. We're continuing to help people feel more comfortable with the way that the world is running right now and how things are working by just having communication and developing relationships. That has sort of now turned into bigger conversations for me on a daily basis around these new outdoor social distancing shelters, the first of which opened yesterday. I've been on daily calls with one of our lieutenants from PPB and a large group of people from the city and county to help plan for those and to help talk about safety issues and try to mitigate any safety concerns going into the camps as the camps are getting built. And so my work has very much shifted to those conversations, as well as sort of mitigating some unforeseen issues or challenges that may be happening in some of the other newer shelter spaces.
Awesome. Is there anything that I forgot that you wanted to touch on or add from your perspective?
I am just really proud of the way the city and county and all of the 8 social service agencies are collaborating right now in sort of this unprecedented way to very quickly get resources set up for people experiencing homelessness to help people stay safe and healthy.
Awesome. And do you have any tips to share about managing stress during this time of crisis?
Yeah, you've probably heard some of these before, but I'm somebody who needs to be moving throughout the day, and so working from home has been very challenging. I'm very much an extrovert, so not having access to other humans has been pretty hard. So I'm trying to do things via Zoom and have social hours with friends, making sure I'm seeing people even in a 2-dimensional way, trying to stay connected. I also need to be exercising on a regular basis, so if I can be outside, I'm grateful that the sun has been out. It's been helpful to be able to spend time on my deck and maybe go for walks by myself, adhering to social distancing, of course.
That reminds me of one last thing I want to point out, and I know you've put it on your social media, but you were involved before you were here in helping put together a program for some seniors. Can you give us just a tip so that maybe our media partners can help us share that?
Absolutely. I think you're referring to the senior loneliness line?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. When I was at Clackamas County Behavioral Health a couple years ago, Clackamas County, in partnership with Lines for Life, developed the senior loneliness line, which is specifically for people 50 and over who are experiencing loneliness and would like to talk to somebody, whether that's somebody who's a clinically licensed professional or just somebody to have day-to-day conversation with. That has recently gone statewide. It was initially a Clackamas County project. During the time of COVID, though, OHA has decided that will be a statewide resource for people.
That's awesome. We'll make sure we get that information out. I think, that's one of the things that we saw initially was called social distancing, and now we're referring to it as physical distancing because we've recognized that we have to remain our social connection, especially with our elderly. So thank you for helping us get that information out as well.
Yeah, thank you for putting that out there. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So if you have more information that you want to know about Stephanie and her role, we did do a podcast not that long ago. It's on our website. And if you have further questions, feel free to send them to the PIO and we'll get them answered. Thank you, Stephanie.
Great. Thank you so much.
So next, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the trends that we're seeing with gun violence. We've got Sergeant Ken Dulio from the Gun Violence Reduction Team here to share the latest on that. Hi, Sergeant Dulio. Thanks for coming in.
How you doing? Good. Thank you.
So can you tell us a quick update on what your role is and what GVRT does as well?
Yes. Again, I'm Sergeant Kenneth Dulio. I've been with the Police Bureau for approximately 22 years. I'm assigned to the Gun Violence Reduction Team. And the Gun Violence Reduction Team, our number one goal or mission is to reduce shootings in the city of Portland. And we do that in kind of three areas. One, we have the uniform component of the Gun Violence Reduction Team, and they're kind of the proactive arm of the unit. They also gather intel, and it's really important that they focus on relationship building, which they do an excellent job of. Secondly, we investigate these Measure 11 shootings, and we have detectives that are assigned to our unit specifically to investigate these shootings, and they investigate those, and there's a lot of work around those investigations and follow-up. Thirdly, we work with the Office of Youth Violence Prevention and help provide intervention and prevention services to people that are affected by gun violence.
So what has changed for you and your unit during the time of the pandemic?
So initially we saw a reduction, and honestly it was like a breath of fresh air. We saw a reduction in shootings. Okay. And honestly it was a breath of fresh air for our unit. And then after a week or so, and when I say initially, kind of when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, when the governor issued her stay-at-home order, we saw that reduction. And then after about 2 weeks, we saw a dramatic spike, which stretched for about 2 weeks, 14, 15 days, and we saw about 30 shootings in that time, which leads to the last few days, which we've seen kind of a slight decrease, which is good, and we hope that continues.
So in looking at some of the numbers I think that were sent out, you guys are at, 150 shootings? Approximately, yes. That you're aware of year to date. And where does that compare to last year? If you don't know that on the fly, we can look it up later.
Yeah, it's an increase from last year's number.
An increase from last year. Okay. Yeah. So how are you and your team managing the work differently, given the situation? So,
the Bureau's put out good direction on this, and we're following it. And so, like, when we're out doing our work, we're wearing our mask. If we're contacting people involved in gun crimes or shootings, we're wearing gloves, wearing eyewear, and making sure that we're protected out in the community. We're following those social distancing guidelines, being at least 6 feet apart, and if not, make sure that you're protected wearing your PPE equipment that's been issued by the Police Bureau. Also, we used to meet daily for roll call briefings, and now we do that through the Zoom app, which is an online teleconferencing app, and we conduct briefings every day, which is important to share information, and that's kind of the new normal for now.
So is there anything related to your work and your team's work that you think the public should be aware of?
I think that, for the public, if you hear something or see something related to gun violence, shooting, or gun-related incidents, call 911. the information provided by the community is super valuable, and I think more valuable than the average citizen maybe believes. A lot of times people think somebody else is calling it in or the police already know, and most times we don't. And the ones that do provide that information later proves to be very valuable in solving these crimes.
Can you touch on, I know you talked a little bit about the uniform component and the proactive nature of that work. They're seizing guns off the street, and I know from some search warrants and things. Where are you guys at as far as gun seizures this year? Yeah,
so regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, like we've talked about, we have had shootings, and we're still doing our job, and we're going out there and trying to interdict some of this violence. And again, back to the proactive arm of our unit, that would be the uniform side. And so they're going out there and contacting people that are suspected of being involved in these shootings and carrying guns illegally. To date, since January 1st, they've recovered 25 firearms, and these are like in individual contacts, individual stops. Several of these guns have extended magazines, upwards of 30 round capacity, and several of these guns have connected back to other shootings.
I think, even having worked dealing with some of this work that you do as well, it's still shocking, I think, to me and even to a lot of members of the public that given everything else that's going on, people are still going out and engaging in shootings across the city. It's disheartening, but I think your team is trying to do what they can to stop that trend.
Yes.
So, well, we appreciate you coming out, and I know we'll be trying to provide some other context and numbers for our media partners on that. So, any final thoughts?
Nope. Just want to stress again, if you see something or hear something, call 911.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.
We're at that time in the program where we're going to welcome the Chief. Hi, Chief. Thanks
Hello.
for coming again.
Yes.
Making time.
Happy Friday.
Yes. So this is, I think, our third time doing this, and every time we kind of have a little bit different information. So what is the latest on PPB's staffing situation and where we're at now that we're about 6 weeks into the COVID situation? Okay.
Well, we still we have not seen any significant changes since our incident management team has been in operation, which is fantastic. We continue to monitor our sick leave, which is holding steady. Another great news for us. We are aware of some Bureau members who have been tested for COVID. However, we are still not aware of any Bureau member who has tested positive. Even with that in mind, though, our incident management team is still in place. They are still planning for any contingencies and still planning on how much PPE we have and trying to keep us on top of everything. So it's very important that they monitor it daily, and they're doing a fantastic job. I also do want to stress that we are still responding to all calls for service, and including the ones where an officer has to be present on scene due to the nature of calls. Officers are responding to those.
So what has changed since we last talked? What changes have been implemented in the past couple of weeks at PPB?
Right. So I think one of the biggest things is we did adapt to the change in the CDC guidelines, and I directed all PPB members, no matter sworn, non-sworn, or of rank, to wear their protective equipment if they could not maintain the appropriate physical distancing, whether they're inside or outside. So that includes our precincts, partner cars. You'll see officers wearing masks, elevators, anything like that. Every member of PPB has been provided the appropriate protective equipment to wear. I know for a lot of folks, including myself, it feels very awkward sometimes to cover your face when you're talking to people because it's not something that we normally do, and it's difficult when you're trying to interact with people when you can't see sometimes. But we understand that a lot of the times our community members are doing this in an effort to protect each other, and we greatly appreciate that, and we appreciate their tolerance of us having to wear masks as well.
Yeah, it's just a new time.
It is.
Time.
Yeah.
The context has changed.
Yeah, very much so.
So, and then I know, we kind of touched on this, but I think it doesn't hurt to reiterate. I know some community members had expressed some concern about the perception of how that would look if they went into, say, a business with their face covered.
Right.
I know a lot of folks have been kind of joking, but kind of not, about going into a bank, say.
Yeah, we have had a lot of questions about that. And what I really want to stress for the community members is the officers are focusing on behaviors. We are all very aware that this is a different time and that the masks play an important role right now in keeping our community safe. And so the officers are taking everything into context when they're responding to calls.
Awesome. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about crime.
Yes.
And kind of what we're seeing. I know we talked a little bit earlier before you came in with robbery and burglary and talked about gun violence and bike theft. So we've been seeing some different trends, but what can you share about any new trends in our crime rates?
So I think at the beginning, I mentioned a couple times that we had seen a dip in a lot of calls for service types. What we're seeing now, though, is a lot of our calls for service are trending back up to what we would normally see during this time of year, which is a bit concerning because sometimes that means that maybe folks are not staying home as much as we would like them to. So we are monitoring that. There are a couple notable items that we're keeping track of. We have seen a significant decrease in our residential burglaries, I think about 40%, while we've seen an increase of approximately 80% in our commercial burglaries. But I'd like to keep that in perspective because percentages can be tricky sometimes. So in perspective, it's about 3 additional calls per week related to commercial burglaries. So I just want to make sure that folks are keeping that into perspective when we start talking about percentages.
Yeah, it's important information. We talked a little bit about that earlier, that shift that we've seen from residential burglaries to commercial burglaries, and Detective Posey was able to provide some good tips for that as well.
And I know there have been the detectives that have interviewed, and the street officers have made some arrests related to that. So hopefully we'll see some declines.
So we want to remind the public that we're still here and working, and we're doing what we can to interdict that, and we are catching folks.
Absolutely.
And arresting them.
Yeah.
So what about some of the other trends?
So for like our civil type calls, I know that I mentioned, I think in one of the previous media events that we had done, that this is where the violation of the governor's order call types are being held, basically. So if somebody calls in and BOEC dispatches a call, it comes out as a civil if somebody is calling to say they believe somebody is violating the governor's order. But that also includes certain things like if it's a neighborhood issue, or not neighborhood, but neighbor issue, like one neighbor saying something about another neighbor, or a roommate issue, those can also be coded as civil. So while we're seeing about 11 more calls per day, it may take a little bit of time for us to actually process how many of those are actually violations or possible violations of the governor's order, because there has to be a bit of investigations when the officers get there, and then it has to get processed through records. So we could see a little bit of change in those numbers, but it looks like we are seeing a significant increase in the number of those types of calls.
And have we seen any citations issued related to the order?
No, we have not issued any citations as of that I know of, which would have been earlier today.
Okay, so no new updates there.
No.
What about traffic? I know we talked last time a little bit about traffic. And
so thankfully we are still seeing a decrease in the number of collisions. We're at about 50% of what we were this time last year. Unfortunately, we are still seeing a significant increase in the number of people driving excessive speeds. So the proportion of citations issued specifically for speeding has doubled since March 12th. So I think about 30% of our citations were issued for speeding prior to that. About 60% are right now. And what's even more troubling is the number of people who are still being cited for driving 31 miles an hour or over the speed limit. And while these two may be, a few calls per day or a few citations per day, the impact that those types of calls can have when somebody is driving that fast can be significant. And what I'd like folks to think about when they're out on the road and driving is that a lot of people who are out here driving right now are doing so because they have an essential job function. So they need to get to and from work, and we need to keep that in mind. We need every essential worker that we have right now. We do not need anybody involved in a collision because they're driving that speed. And if it's something that you need to actually really, really think about, I would encourage you to just set your cruise control. We are all getting places faster than we have prior to this because there are less cars on the road. So enjoy the fact that you will get there a few minutes early and drive the speed limit.
Yeah, now is not the time to end up in the hospital or to get in a collision with a doctor who's headed to the hospital.
Yeah. No, we need our essential workers. So everybody, please slow down.
We touched a little bit on shootings with Sergeant Dulio.
Yeah.
I know, there we had seen a decrease and an uptick as well, but that I know is of concern. So I don't know if, you had anything to add on that part, but I know that we've had a lot of concern expressed about some of the shootings.
Right. And Sergeant Dulio did an excellent job of explaining, and I think I really want to highlight to the public that the GVRT team is still out there working. They are still out there doing their job. They're contacting folks. They're doing their investigations. They have made some arrests, which hopefully will result in a decline in the shootings that we're seeing. But I'd also like to highlight Sergeant Dulio's request that if the public sees something or knows something, even if they think that, no, it's not important, or maybe somebody else has already mentioned it, to call. You just don't know whether or not that could be that just one little piece of information that leads to a significant arrest that could have significant impact.
So what's the latest on domestic violence? I know we've talked on that a couple different times. Are we still seeing an increase from before?
We do believe we are still seeing a little bit of an increase, about an average of 1 DV arrest per day. Our domestic violence arrests were up from January until now. So we're not 100% sure if it's specifically related to COVID, but we are still seeing an increase in the domestic violence arrests that we're making per day.
So you said they were up from January. So that was before.
Right. So that's why we can't 100% say that everything's attributed to that. We did see a little bit of uptick, but as of right now, we are still seeing about 1 additional DV arrest per day.
Okay, so we're still watching that. And,
yes,
again, just a reminder for anybody out there, we do have resources.
Absolutely.
With our advocates and a lot of the different crisis lines as well.
Yes. So. And that kind of leads, I think, right into our suicide calls. I think at the beginning we had mentioned that we had seen an increase for the first couple of weeks, but thankfully that number has continued to decline. I think we're at about half of what it was, and it's kind of maintained that. I'm hopeful that our messaging and our partners' messaging and just making sure that everybody's aware of the resources that are out there has helped people. And we will continue to push that message out because there are a lot of resources available for people. And again, I would like to encourage people, if you know people who aren't able to leave their house, to reach out to your friends and to your family and just make sure that everybody kind of gets that personal connection throughout the day.
Super important right now.
Yes.
So at our last event a couple weeks ago, we had the director from Sunshine Division, Kyle Camberg, came out and talked about the partnership with PPB. And I was just wondering if you had an update about how that's been going. They kicked off, a new home delivery program the following Monday. So what can you share about that?
So Sunshine Division, with the help of a lot of people, including the Portland Police Bureau, I think we're able to deliver just over 1,200 food boxes last week. I think Kyle mentioned that they were shooting for about 1,000, so they were able to exceed that, which is an amazing number, which I think, if we do the math correct, is about 34,000 meals that they delivered last week.
Wow.
The food pantries requests are still up. I think Kyle said last week it was about up 6 times what it normally is this time of year. And as far as I know, it's maintained that level. So the Sunshine Division is doing an amazing job just being able to reach out to folks. And I just want to highlight one little story that I heard. I got an email today from an officer who normally works in our narcotics and organized crime division, but today was out delivering food boxes for the Sunshine Division. Not all day, just part of the day, if folks were wondering. But he was able to meet with a woman out in Northeast Portland who was 94 years old and was able to take a few minutes and talk to her today out on her porch, and was able to hear her life story, how she ended up here, all of the things that she had been through, and then at 94 years old to also be experiencing now this pandemic. And just after reading the email from the officer, one, that it impacted the officer enough to actually send an email related to this incident is showing how truly impactful these interactions can have. And I think it's important too, because we are limited in our ability right now to interact with the public. And so I think it highlights just how important those even just small gestures are, not only for our community right now, but for our officers.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I know Kyle shared with me that they were able to get funding for about 10 weeks. I think they talked about 2 months, so that's a little bit more, which is great. They're looking for other funding partners, and then he's still updating their website. So what can you share about community support related to PPB?
It's been amazing. I mean, we've had so many people reach out. How can we help? How can we help? We've had businesses donate different types of PPE. We've had different types of face masks delivered. We've had hand sanitizer delivered. We've had a lot of people who've wanted to bring things that some things, we can't accept at this point, but we are so thankful of the offer that people are wanting. Last week, we had the Chinese American Society and Home Depot donate different types of PPE to the Portland Police Bureau. And I think it's so important for the officers to understand that the community wants them to be safe, and they want them to be able to respond and to do their jobs. And I think it helps the officers realize just how critical they are and how supported they are by their community. Another quick story. Today, I got a text message from one of the commanders who received a letter from, I will just say Jack, and it was Jack explaining how sorry they were because they were unable to bring donuts to the police officers at this time, which I thought was so sweet. And but they were going to bring donuts as soon as they could. So Jack, if you're listening, the officers would appreciate donuts as soon as you can, and they would love to meet you. So we will try to highlight that as much as we can. But I think it's something that the officers need to hear.
Yeah. Well, I know we got to participate in a parade yesterday, thanking our frontline medical workers.
Absolutely.
And I know from watching their responses and reactions, because I was out there for many of the hospitals, just having others say thank you, in all the ways it matters. And we're seeing that here as well, whether it's letters or cards so.
In fact, awesome. My sister works at one of the hospitals that we visited yesterday, and it went through her division and everything like wildfire. I mean, everybody was so thankful. It was a bit of a break, I think, for people just to take a moment, realize that we're all in this together, and that we are going to be successful and that we're supporting each other.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah. I feel like in many ways, our distancing and everything else is just bringing us closer together.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, I think that wraps up our time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for listening to The Talking Beat. Do you have a question for us? You can call and leave us a message on our dedicated voicemail line at 971-339-8868. Or send us an email to talkingbeat@portlandoregon.gov. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. More episodes can be found at our website, portlandoregon.gov/police/podcast.